On a rock wall in the Algerian Sahara, there's a painting of a man with mushrooms growing out of his body. Out of his arms, out of his head. He's running, or maybe dancing, and he's about 9,000 years old. And for 60 years, people have looked at that figure and decided they know exactly what's going on. Ancient humans, tripping. The first artists, high out of their minds. Here's the problem. That's a guess dressed up as a fact. So let's do the harder, better thing. Let's ask what our ancestors actually did with mushrooms. The real answer is stranger than the myth. Because the relationship goes deep, tens of thousands of years deep. And it runs straight through three stories people love to get wrong. 1, the theory that magic mushrooms grew the human brain, a claim millions of people half believe. 2, a frozen man in the Alps who carried 2 mushrooms to his grave and what they were for. And 3, that painting, and whether the first artists really were high. We're going to take all 3 seriously. We're also going to find out which ones survive contact with the evidence. Start with the big one. In 1992, a man named Terence McKenna published a book and an idea that refused to die. He called it the stoned ape. The pitch goes like this. Somewhere back in Africa, our hungry ancestors started eating psilocybin mushrooms growing in animal dung. Small doses sharpened their eyesight, so they hunted better. Bigger doses loosened their tongues and lit up their imagination, giving us language, art, and religion. And so McKenna said the mushroom built the modern mind. The brain doubled in size and a clever ape woke up as a human. It's a gorgeous story. It explains the hardest question in human origins. How did we get smart so fast with one neat little cause you can hold in your hand? So is it true? No. And it's worth knowing exactly why, because the real numbers are the whole point. McKenna pinned the change to maybe 100,000 years ago, but our brains didn't wait for him. 3.5 million years ago, an ancestor called Australopithecus had a brain around 450 cubic centimeters, grapefruit-sized. By the time Homo erectus was walking around roughly 2 million years ago, it was past 800. Today we sit near 1,350. That's not a sudden magic mushroom jump, that's a slow climb across at least 13 different species over 3 million years. The expansion was already well underway 1.5 million years before McKenna's mushrooms ever show up. And the mushroom itself doesn't cooperate. The dung-loving psilocybin species McKenna built his story on thrive around big herds of grazing cattle, animals we didn't live alongside in numbers until farming, thousands of years after our brains had already done most of their growing. The one prop the theory needs shows up late and in the wrong place. And the evidence for the mechanism, there isn't any. No fossil shows it, no gene points to it. The psilocybin makes you a better hunter studies he leaned on don't actually say what he said they said. Scientists didn't argue the stoned ape down, they just had nothing to test. It's a beautiful idea with no receipts. So what did grow the brain? The honest answer is less of a headline and more of a grind. Cooking, for one. Fire pre-digested our food, so we pulled more calories out of every bite, plus more meat and fat in the diet. Bigger social groups where keeping track of who owed whom was its own kind of intelligence. No single hero ingredient. Just a few 100,000 years of feedback between fire, food, and each other. But here's the part that actually gets under my skin. Knock down the stoned ape, and people assume the whole thing's a fantasy. That our ancestors barely understood mushrooms at all. That's the real myth. Because once you stop looking for a magic shortcut, the genuine evidence is everywhere, and it's far weirder than getting high. September 1991. 2 hikers in the Alps stumble on a body melting out of a glacier. They think it's a lost climber. It's a man who died about 5,300 years ago, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. We call him Ötzi. He'd been shot in the back with an arrow and left in the ice, a copper axe still beside him. And the freak preservation means we don't just have his bones. We have his clothes, his tools, his last meal, and the contents of his pockets. He was carrying 2 kinds of mushroom. The first was birch polypore, threaded carefully onto a leather strap. It's a hard, pale shell fungus. And it happens to have antibacterial and anti-worm properties. Here's the gut punch. When scientists examined Ötzi's intestines, they found whipworm, the exact parasite that fungus fights. A man in the Copper Age with no idea germs existed was carrying the right medicine for the bug actually living inside him. And that's the thing. This isn't random foraging. He didn't grab whatever was nearby. He carried a specific fungus for a specific problem, strung up and ready, the way you'd pack a first aid kit. 5,000 years before anyone wrote the word medicine. The second mushroom is the one I can't stop thinking about. It was tinder fungus, and it was part of his fire kit. Which brings me to a real contender for the most important mushroom in human history, and you'd never eat it. Pound the inside of that fungus into a soft, fuzzy felt, a material called amadou, and it catches a single spark and holds it, smoldering, so you can carry fire from one camp to the next. For thousands of years, that wild fungus was a piece of survival technology, not food, not medicine, a tool. And people didn't stop at fire. That same fungus felt got pounded into wound dressings, even into caps and pouches you could wear. One wild mushroom doing the job of a lighter, a bandage, and a scrap of cloth. Archaeologists keep turning it up in Stone Age fire kits across Europe, thousands of years before Ötzi ever tucked a piece into his pouch. And that's really the whole channel in one mushroom. The actual evidence is cooler than the legend. If that's your kind of thing, hit subscribe and stick around. Okay, there's one more piece, and it's the one that hits the dumb caveman myth hardest. Spain, a cave called El Cedrón. About 50,000 years ago, a young Neanderthal is suffering, a dental abscess in his jaw and a nasty stomach bug. We know this because his plaque fossilized on his teeth, trapping a record of what went into his mouth. And in that plaque, poplar, which carries salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, and traces of penicillium, the mold we'd eventually turn into the world's first antibiotic. He was, in some rough sense, dosing himself with a painkiller and an antibiotic. And we didn't discover what that mold could do until Alexander Fleming in 1928, roughly 48,000 years too late to be first. Now, the honest part, was that deliberate? We don't know for certain. Maybe he just ate moldy plants and got lucky. The careful scientists say exactly that, and they're right to be cautious. But here's the detail that keeps me up. The healthy Neanderthal in the same cave had none of it in his teeth, only the sick one. Deliberate or not, that's real knowledge of what the land could do for a body in pain. Which finally brings us back to that painting in the Sahara. Were the first artists high? Honestly, maybe. There's a wall in Spain, Selva Pascuala, where a 6,000-year-old mural shows little fungi that might be a local psychedelic mushroom. The Tassili figure really does have mushrooms growing off its body, but might be and really does look like aren't proof. People want these to be a snapshot of the first trip so badly that they stop checking. The truth is, we have suggestive paint and no certainty. Our ancestors absolutely altered their minds, fermented honey and fruit. Ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and can bend perception. Datura, a plant that throws you into delirium. The taste for an altered state is genuinely ancient, but the grand story of psychedelics inventing religion is one we can't actually back up. Not yet. So here's what 40,000 years of mushrooms actually tells us. We keep hunting for the one fungus that made us human, the shortcut, the cheat code, but the evidence runs the other way. It took a mind that already noticed things, already remembered which mushroom healed and which one killed, already tested the world and passed the answer on, to turn a forest full of poison into medicine and fire, and maybe a vision on a cave wall. The mushroom didn't make us clever. Being clever is what let us make something of the mushroom. That's the part the myth always skips. The magic was never in the mushroom. It was in the patient, stubborn, knowledge-hoarding ape who figured it out, one careful bite at a time. If you want more of the real story before the history books, we'll see you in the next one.